Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. A few weeks back, I gave a listener shout out to Dick MCD, who sent me a lovely Facebook message suggesting a Scottish murder case. After some research, I stumbled upon a case that went unsolved for 35 years. Until recently, that is. Advancements in forensic science allowed police in Glasgow, Scotland, to finally nail the killer. In 1984, Mary McLaughlin was 58 years old. She had 11 children, 28 grandchildren, and probably the youngest great-grandma known to man. With such a large family, it's safe to say that she was well loved. Mary's partner worked out of town and spent half of his time in hotels and the other half at Mary's flat in Glasgow. September 26, 1984, he was out of town and Mary spent the evening at the local pub playing dominoes with her daughter, Catherine. She played dominoes there quite often. When they finished, Catherine took the bus home and Mary walked back to her flat. It was less than a mile and she had done it many times before. On her way home, Mary stopped at Armando's chip shop where she bought a pack of cigarettes and some fritters. This was the last time she was seen alive. One of her sons, Martin Cullen, visited her regularly. October 2nd, Martin showed up for his weekly visit. He found it strange that there was no answer at the door. He could smell a foul odor coming from inside the flat and grew worried that something happened to his mother. He tried to get a key from the landlord, but when that failed, he kicked the door in. His then partner went inside and searched the flat. Martin heard her scream and ran inside to discover his mother lying in her bed. Her dentures were on the floor, and her green dress was on backwards. The cord from her dressing gown was wrapped tightly around her neck 3 times and double knotted. Her hands were turning black, and the smell of decomposition was overwhelming. Mary was killed 6 days earlier, the night she walked home from the pub. I can't imagine finding a loved one in these circumstances. It's most definitely left Martin traumatized. He said, "The sight of my mom's body when I found it frightened the life out of me and has tortured me ever since. It was terrifying, as was going to the city mortuary to identify her later." I find that last part curious. I figured if Martin was the one to find her in her house and there is more than likely identification in her wallet, why would he need to go confirm her identity again at the morgue? Who knows? I have to remind myself this is in Scotland, so I'm sure they have different protocols. It's just sad that he was forced to see her like that again. I also wonder how, with 11 kids and a partner, you go 6 days without communication and no one found it suspicious. I realize this is before cell phones, it's 1984, but you would think at least Mary's partner would call while he was gone. Again, this is beside the point. Her partner isn't our suspect. He had a solid alibi working out of town. The attack on Mary McLaughlin was sexually motivated. The fact that her dress was on backwards meant that she had been undressed, and she was no longer wearing her bra. The killer left behind DNA, but the samples were too small to test back in 1984. Really, the only testing capable at this time was with blood, determining the blood type and serum testing to decipher hormones indicating male or female. But with constant advancements in science, the samples were tucked away in hopes to be tested in the future. Outside of being spotted at Armando's chip shop, only one other person reported seeing Mary. She was walking home, carrying a grocery bag in one hand and shoes in the other. Now, I have totally done this, but I was 21 and stumbling 3 blocks home from the bar in my club heels. At some point, you just stop caring and kick off your shoes. Catherine reported even though they were at the pub, Mary was not drunk when they parted ways. And somehow I doubt 58-year-old great-grandma Mary was wearing club heels. There were no witnesses to her being accompanied by a man. This was way before CCTV. Police took hundreds of statements, but without any leads, the case grew cold. Investigators knew the truth could be found in those DNA samples. Unfortunately, they had to wait. 24 years later, in 2008, the samples were tested but unable to yield a profile for the killer. The breakthrough didn't happen until 2014. And I know I'm going to mess this up. The Scottish Crime Campus in Gartosh, North Lanarkshire, opened a new DNA profiling facility. When examining a DNA sample, up until this point, there were 11 different markers for identification. Scientists at the Scottish Crime Campus had the technology capable of identifying 24 different markers. This allowed them to test smaller samples with more accuracy. Having said that, it wasn't until 2019 that they took a closer look at the dressing gown cord that was tied around Mary's neck. They very slowly and carefully untied one of the knots. They took a sample from the center of the knot, believing it had been undisturbed for 35 years. A sample like that is considered the golden standard for testing. When running the collected DNA against the Scottish criminal database, they had a hit. 59-year-old Graham McGill. He was a repeat sex offender. The crazy thing was, McGill was actually in prison when Mary was killed. He was sentenced to 6 years for assault with intent to ravish and rape, and let out in 3 for good behavior. The night Mary died, he was on a temporary release from HMP, Her Majesty's Prison, Edinburgh. After completing prison programs and an annual review, a temporary release can be granted for a few different reasons. 1, to assist in the prisoner's preparation for release. I assume you want to make sure you have a place to live and apply for jobs. 2, to maintain contact with family members. I think this one is kind of BS. That's what visiting hours are for. But I guess maybe giving them a small taste of freedom before tossing them back in their prison cell could further drill in the consequences of their actions. 3, to test or assess the prisoner's ability to cope outside the prison environment. Well, Graham McGill failed his test. While out on an unsupervised leave, he followed Mary McLaughlin back to her flat where he strangled her to death. Graham assumed he had gotten away with it and continued assaulting women. He was arrested again in 1999 for a brutal assault with intent to ravish. He was sentenced to life but released in 2007. Obviously, this man cannot be trusted. Why they continued to give him second and third chances is beyond me. The sources I used said Mary's murder was sexually motivated, yet intent to rape was deleted from his charges in court, so I can only assume he did not sexually assault her. Well, rape her. If he undressed her without her consent, I would still call that a sexual assault. Investigators tracked down Graham's ex-wife, Suzanne Russell. When she heard about the accusations against him, Suzanne reported that Graham admitted to killing a woman. She never told anyone because he threatened to kill her if she did. Quote, "He said he strangled her because he just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. He said he was shocked how long it actually took to murder her." Unquote. That's what everyone says about strangulation. It's not like the movies where after 30 seconds they slump over dead. It would take a lot of effort to pull the cord tight for minutes. Yes, minutes, which I'm sure feels like an eternity when the person is resisting and trying to fight back. Mary had defensive wounds showing that she did indeed fight for her life, but her 58-year-old body didn't stand a chance against 22-year-old Graham. December 4th, 2019, Glasgow police arrived on the McGill doorstep to arrest Graham for murder. He was in total shock. 35 years went by, he never thought in a million years he would get caught now. Graham adamantly denies involvement, but the scientist who conducted these tests said the odds it wasn't Graham was 85,000 to 1. Other samples were then tested from a cigarette butt nearby, as well as Mary's dress and a black bra found around the corner in the garden. They all matched Graham McGill. So his odds were now 1,000,000,000 to 1. Not very good odds there, Graham. Yet he still denies involvement. It only took the jury 2 hours to come back with a guilty verdict. He was jailed for life with a minimum sentence of 14 years. This ruling didn't settle well with one of Mary's daughters, Gina. She said, "He probably thought he was home and dry, but the fact is, he has been held accountable and has not gotten away with it." However, 14 years for what he did is really nothing. A jury found him guilty. Life should mean life, and there should be no early release for him. Should he not die in prison? I can't say I disagree with you, Gina, especially because he has been jailed twice previously for heinous crimes. Martin, Mary's son, who found her that fateful day, said, "There's no joy at the verdict, but there's justice, and my mom can finally rest in peace. It has been years of torture for everyone in the family, and there is a sense of relief. He is a revolting individual, and it brings some comfort to think that he will never again see anywhere other than the inside of that prison." Apparently, he has faith that an early release won't happen in 14 years. If it does, Graham McGill will be 73 years old. Knowing what he did while on temporary release from prison, I think it would be irresponsible to allow this man back into society, even in his old age. He already lived 35 undeserved years as a free man. I love hearing about these old cases being solved by modern science and technology, like the Golden State Killer. I plan to cover Joseph DeAngelo soon, but I'm sure it will be at least a two-parter, so you'll probably see it next season. I'm bummed to say I have no new reviews to read today. YouTube has been kind lately with comments on my videos, so I do thank y'all for that. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment and leave me a review. It really does help with the exposure of the show. You can also now leave a rating on Spotify. If you would like to support the show, you can leave a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com/killerstories or find my link tree in the show notes to shop Killer Stories merch. You can find me on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Killer Stories Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at Killer Stories PC. Continue to email those story suggestions, killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been a Killer Story.